Hi, everyone. My name is Madhav Rajan. I'm the Dean at Chicago booth and the Geor Schulz Professor of Accounting. I'm thrilled that you could all be here as we welcome our alum, Mary Tolan, founder and managing partner of Chicago Pacific Founders, back to booth for our Distinguished Speaker Series. This is a long-standing tradition, and the DSS brings high-profile leaders from business, from the government, from the community to back to booth to essentially share their insights and experience. And this, of course, the virtual stuff we started during COVID with people like Tom Ricketts, Jenny Scanlon, JP Gann, Matt Maloney, and others. Just last month, we chatted with Chelsea Stoner of Battery Ventures. And today we're thrilled to have Mary. So I'm just going to introduce Mary now. So Mary Tolan was the co-founder of Chicago Pacific Founders back in 2014. And with the vision and focus that's made her such a big investment leader, Mary essentially strategically identifies founders who are poised to transform patient care services and delivery. And the firm has been amazingly successful, always producing top decile returns. Prior to that, Mary founded R1 RCM in 2003 and led the firm's growth for a decade. Mary was the CEO and board chair. And essentially, she focused on revolutionizing patient access and revenue cycle processes for healthcare providers. And the firm became a top provider of comprehensive end-to-end healthcare revenue cycle management and health management services infrastructure. And Mary actually took the company, went IPO, took the company public in 2010. Before that, Mary was a group chief executive at Accenture, heading up their super important and large global operating group. Mary serves on the Chicago booth, she's a booth alum, serves on the Chicago Booth Advisory Council, and is a trustee of the University of Chicago. So thanks very much, Mary, for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure to be with you.
So, Mary, we have a bunch of questions people have turned in advance, but I also want to encourage the audience to please send in questions through the Q&A, and I will take them, intersperse them with the questions that were sent in advance to have a great conversation with Mary. So please keep the questions coming. Mary, let me just start by saying, in your career, what prompted you to do an MBA first?
I actually, believe it or not, I didn't want to just do an MBA. I wanted to do an MBA at the University of Chicago. I was really, really quite impressed with the institution. I really took a look at people who were making a huge difference in the world at the time, Milton Friedman, and all of the Chicago School of Economics in terms of influencing free markets, how they influenced the Reagan administration, and my mentor, Geor Schulz. And I just thought it was an amazing powerhouse of ideas that could really change the world. So I specifically wanted to get an MBA at the University of Chicago.
And how did you find the MBA? Was it what you had anticipated or expected kind of going in?
I really loved the experience. And I would say a couple of things that really kind of stand out. Number one, I think if you know you have had the best business school education and you have the confidence of knowing you've had that, you know what it is, you know what it isn't. But you're never going to be sitting across the table negotiating with someone or trying to do a business deal or a commercial deal of any kind with somebody that maybe has had a seriously better education than you had. That's number one. It's a real confidence builder, I think, to know that. I think another thing is the network of relationships that you build, both with people that are part of your cohort and your class, but also with the faculty and with the university. I had a chance very shortly after graduating to have a Nobel laureate, Merton Miller, help me with a program which was a real accelerant to my career. I was tapped and asked to teach the entire partnership of Accenture how to be more value-oriented in how they were approaching new ideas that they would bring to customers, and how to have an entire proactive initiative, which at the time we called business integration value, that could unlock economic value. And then actually at the time, also Steve Kaplan and Richard Lefkowitz also got involved. and really helped us. And we actually built a training program that was rolled out to every partner in the global organization and fueled massive amount of improvement in the business. And that was a great accelerant to my career as well. I then had an opportunity to start an energy advisor board. I was running the global energy business for Accenture, and I got Geor Schulz, the former dean of the business school, to chair it. And he and I then approached Gary Becker, another Nobel laureate, to have him join. Ted Snyder also joined. He was the dean. And we basically got every single CEO of a top energy business, from Sir John Brown of British Petroleum to you name it, to join this. Now, that fueled growth in our energy business like nothing else came close to it, in terms of building all those relationships with the CEOs and then all the opportunities that came out of it. So I really enjoyed not just the education, but the relationships with, again, fellow classmates and the faculty, and have found many different ways to help that kind of fuel career acceleration.
I mean, that's amazing. The fact that you knew these faculty and you had a connection with them after you left, which is astonishing. So what sort of prompted the leap, Mary, from working for Accenture to sort of wanting to do your own thing?
Well, I always had in the back of my mind that I did want to do my own thing, because I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So, in some households, kids are encouraged to become doctors, or they're encouraged to become lawyers, or maybe presidents or CEOs. But my dad was very clear that the best title in the world after mom and dad is founder. And he really made it fun to observe him in building his own businesses. Both the highs and the lows, you could see how the growth was there, and just all of that, control your own destiny and seek out all the opportunity that you have in front of you, and have a lot of fun building your company, building your team, building the people around you. I say to people all the time, imagine never having to work with anyone you don't want to work with again. That's one. I really let that idea wash over you for a moment. But that's one of the great things that a founder has in a business. You assemble that team. Every single person on your team is a person of your choosing, or of their choosing. And so you get to really set the tone for the culture. So you have the strategy that you're really able to drive for. You know what those goals are and what you're trying to achieve. Those are basically challenges of your own choosing, and then you choose this wonderful group of teammates. And so actually going to work every day is more like going to your clubhouse to have fun and to play at what you enjoy doing.
And so when you started it, one of the questions that came in was, what approaches did you find work best to sort of build your customer base at R1? How did you go about doing that?
So I would have to say, I don't think I could have done a very good job if I had tried to start a company much earlier in my career. I think learning a great deal at Accenture over 21 years, I learned how to get new customers. I actually became one of the biggest kind of big deal partners in the firm. And so I learned how to sell multi-billion-dollar deals, which is a very interesting thing. You have to go to a big organization and solve a big problem, and it's easier if it's not new wallet or new dollars they have to spend, but you're taking over an existing cost structure that they're already spending on, and you're just going to basically do it for less and give them an immediate savings. It's much easier for them to get their head wrapped around saying yes to something like that. And then if you can even increase performance over time and give them more yield on that process. So I learned how to do business process outsourcing. And I knew that you could grow, you could do $100 million deal one day, you could do $1 billion deal the next. You could grow a business very rapidly. And so the other thing I learned at Accenture is never think small. So instead of starting a company and saying, let me start with some small little account, a small physician group, and then maybe I'll get a little bit bigger and so forth. There was a lot of companies in the revenue cycle space that were doing that. I thought about it the way Accenture would think about it, which is we're a new market entrant. What is the biggest and best customer that we can get as our first customer, where all of our competition will wake up the next morning and say, oh my gosh, look what they just got. And so in this case, when we were starting our one, the market was 85% not-for-profit. And the largest not-for-profit system in the country was Ascension, a big Catholic health system. So we said, let's go after Ascension. And let's go right to the top decision makers. We want to talk to the CFO of Ascension and the chief strategy officer right out of the gate. We knew that the CEO at the time was really quite busy on a bunch of other matters. But because we had the credibility of our whole team, having come from very big jobs where we had done something very similar, we had a lot of credibility. And we said, look, we will come in out of the gate, and contractually, when we sign this contract, you will immediately have another 5 million of EBITDA, and we'll have 120 million of revenue a year. And then we'll start adding to that contribution over time. So it was a very compelling value proposition. And we really thought about going after the best customers in a race to kind of own the market, if you will.
So what are the other question also said, like, what advice would you have for other people who are thinking of making that leap? And I mean, you made the point that having had that background and experience really helped you do it. Any other thoughts that you would have on what you would recommend for people thinking about starting their own thing?
Well, I do think that if you can extrapolate from something that you either have personally done that's been successful, or where you have, and this is another thing that we do a lot of times with new companies that we are forming at Chicago Pacific, if we can just study another success example. So we're not trying to be the first people in the world to do something. Let's put that in the too hard pile right now, okay? We'll let Elon do that. We're going to reduce our chances of failure by saying, you know what, there's already company 1, 2, and 3 that have done this well. Let's study them, reverse engineer how they did it, and then let's be the next one in that's going to do it even bigger and bolder, but knowing very well what the recipe is for success, and then maybe getting ourselves an even more talented team. So putting, maybe each one of those 3 or 4 companies we studied had some exceptional people. Let's see if we can pull some of them out and make a dream team to go after that formula.
We had a bunch of questions come in about Chicago Pacific, and so maybe I'll just sort of go down that list. So you talk a lot about value-based care, right? So could you maybe just define that for the audience, Mary? What is that, and how is that changing healthcare?
Sure. So if you said, why is U.S. healthcare maybe the flabbiest part of the U.S. economy? Why do I say that? We're spending more than double other advanced countries. We don't get better outcomes. I can't say that about transportation or just about any other sector. I mean, we are flabby. And if you said, why is that? It's because we have a unique, in essence, pricing model and set of incentives, which is called a fee-for-service system. So unlike other countries where doctors and nurses and so forth might be on salary, ours are largely getting paid fee-for-service. The more things I do, the more money I make. So all the ingenuity in U.S. healthcare goes into doing more. And it's usually well-intended, but there is a phenomenon called overtreated. And basically what we have is people who are trying to do more in the most expensive way, in the most expensive setting, because that's how they make money. Okay? That's a weird thing. There's no other industry you can think of where everybody makes more if they get their costs up, they charge, that kind of thing, right? So what value-based care says is, let's fix that. And let's not attempt to be like a Canada or a UK, just putting everybody on salary. Let's actually move all the incentives to a very profoundly positive incentive, which is to say, now I'm going to give you a recurring revenue stream. If you're a doctor taking care of a bunch of patients, you'll get per member per month. And I won't even ask you to take actuarial risk, meaning you'll get adjusted if your patients are sicker, you'll get more per member per month. Now, if you actually start putting your ingenuity in how to keep your patients healthier and out of the hospital, you actually will make all that margin. So the fact that in the first instance, we're actually so bloated creates a tremendous opportunity to improve. And what happens, and the good news is it's not my theory, this has all been proven out with companies that are large and scaled, and people have been doing this for 20 years, but it's only now really becoming of scale. The good news is once you have that incentive, doctors will start to use data and analytics, which they really don't use, dirty little secret in a fee-for-service system, to say, of all my patients, which ones are the 10% sickest that are going to drive 70% of expense, and how do I give them a lot more time and attention and try to figure out what I can do better to improve their care. And then you start to worry about things like patients have food insecurity, or they don't have transportation, or they're just, for whatever reason, not getting their medications refilled. And then you start to actually have members of your team that help those patients, and there's a huge ROI on it. And so even though you can't bill anyone for it, it doesn't matter. It's saving an admission to a hospital, which is going to cost $15,000. So can I afford to help Mrs. Jones get her medication refilled if I can save $15,000? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So you now really get all the ingenuity going into how to keep people healthier, mm-hmm. and out of the hospital and out of being overtreated, and everything starts moving in a good direction.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like you have a lot more alignment now, right? You're better off if you do a better job of keeping patients healthier longer, which seems to kind of make sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Mary, that data was something that hadn't been used before. Clearly, with all the changes we are seeing, cost of computers going down, you have, ML and AI coming in. Do you see that as having an impact on value-based care as we look ahead?
Well, I think, this sort of data is almost rudimentary, and it's not that, that we're going to be filling up the cloud or anything like that. It's just that in that fee-for-service system, that primary care doctor was going to see 25 patients for 15 minutes each, and then they billed each one $125, and there was no data needed to do that. I mean, they looked at the file and, here's what we should do for you. But now that doctor doesn't have to see 25 patients a day. They can see 4 or 5 a day, spend a lot more time on them, and start using all their time with the data and analytics to figure out the next best action. And it's not in any way break the bank technology. It's actually, in other industries, it would be thought of as something we were doing 10 years ago.
So healthcare, of course, is a very heavily regulated sector of the economy. And a lot of economists have written that the regulations are sort of holding back innovation. Love to get your thoughts on that. And if you were to advise the incoming president, what would you tell them about how to make healthcare more innovative?
I think it's absolutely true that there's healthcare regulation that's coming into our R&D pipeline and drug development that is very, very much inhibiting things. And I've had a chance to talk to the chief scientific officer, Eli Lilly, the very guy who helped them get to the GLP breakthroughs and so forth. And if you listen to him, he said, I would say I have a very heavy heart about what regulation is doing right now, and what it's going to prevent us from getting to that otherwise we could get to. So I would say the number one thing is for the new president to listen to those scientists that can describe what could be in the pipeline and what would the consequences of that be, and what is falling out of the pipeline because of regulation, and try to figure out how we fix that. The second biggest thing I would say is we have both the best care in the world and the worst care in the world, and it sits right next to each other all over our country. So we have this huge practice variation. I'll give an example. Shannon Brownlee wrote a book, Overtreated, And she's a very serious investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and then she turned into really so passionate about healthcare, and she went and got all this data. And so what she could see is that in one county in New Hampshire, right next to this county in Vermont, back to back, same socioeconomic conditions, same demographics, same everything. In this county, if you're a child 12 and over, your chances that you have had a tonsillectomy, 50%. In this county, same thing, 7%. Wow, 50% versus 7%. In this county, if you're a woman over 55, your chances of having had a hysterectomy, 45%. In this county, 8%. What is that? Why? And then if you study it, what you realize is a lot of times physicians are very much doing things that they learned at their medical school, and they're in a milieu of other doctors that went to a similar medical school. And so this practice variation persists. So I would say if we took the wonderful gem known as the National Institute of Health, and we said, we, like every other part of America, are in a search for best practices, and we're going to ask the best leading clinicians in our country, the best cardiologists, the best oncologists, the best radiologists. It'll be a very prestigious thing to be appointed to this. And these groups are going to actually scour the data and arrive at the best practices. And then we're going to disseminate them, and we're going to hold everybody accountable to doing something similar. And we know you can never cookie cutter healthcare, but when we have significant populations, we're going to be looking for things to converge closer to these best practices. We could save a lot of money, save a lot of lives, and improve healthcare a lot. It's in any other industry, this kind of variation away from best practices just doesn't happen. But healthcare doesn't naturally look for these competitive points and then all kind of adopt for some reason. We need a convening mechanism for getting that to work.
So maybe one of the questions that came in sort of touches on that. What is your view on government mandated disclosure for transparency on treatment efficiency, efficacy that various healthcare providers come up with?
I think it's very valuable to just get more and more data again, best practice data. And there's no real valid reason to hide the data. We know we can de-identify it. We know we can be within health information privacy regulations. And so putting our heads in the sand is just an excuse to not change.
Another question that just came in said you gave a great description of value-based care. And the question was, how would this model be different from the model that the capitation model that like a Kaiser permanently uses?
So actually, Kaiser is in this model in the sense that they have their own employed doctors, and they have the health plan, so they're the insurance plan as well. I would say, so they actually on a very large scale basis have made important strides towards value-based care. Could it go a little bit further? Yes, because their model started with a physician group, the Occidental side, and the model is a little bit set up to have, rich physician comp, but it's not as tied to how that individual physician is performing with their panel as maybe it could be. So I would say they could go one order of magnitude even closer to the model by getting down to individual physicians and how they perform.
So maybe one of the questions that came up was sort of, in the space that you're in, what are some interesting areas for a healthcare entrepreneur? Where would you ask them to think about?
Well, I think sometimes I think about where are the biggest problems, right? That need fixing. So one area I think is end of life care. We spend dramatically more than other advanced countries. I think 46% of Americans will actually die in a hospital bed. That number in other European countries might be 8%. At the same time, if we were to look at all of the surveys and you ask Americans what do they think is the right way to have end of life, they invariably will say, well, I want to be at home, want to be there with my loved ones. If I could be pain-free and if I could be lucid, that would be the right way. And yet that's not what happens. So I would say looking for breakthroughs in end-of-life care. Now, we're actually working on one right now that seems to be making a big progress, but there will be room for lots of people to follow this model. And you have to realize that the problem is actually the care team. They don't want to use the word hospice. They know it feels like giving up, and the patient and their family are going, there's going to be tears, there's going to be crying. It could be an 11-minute conversation. It could be a 45-minute conversation. It's a disruptor in their day, and they don't want to do it. So what we learned is that don't ask people to do things that they're fundamentally showing you in every way they don't want to do. So if we give that team in that clinic a benefit counselor, and we say, you know what, you don't have to bring the hospice word up. Invite this patient who's likely getting to that point on their journey to talk to the benefit counselor who's right there in the clinic. And the benefit counselor begins by talking about, are you going to need a hospital bed on the first floor of your home? Could we think about what other durable medical equipment we might need? What about oxygen? What about a home care support? And you go through all this, and maybe 20 minutes into the conversation, you say, you know, Medicare actually has come up with a benefit that will help you not even have to pay out of pockets on this. Could save you maybe $2,000 or $3,000. It's in the hospice benefit, but it does not mean we're giving up on you. You're still going to be seen by your doctor. It does mean no one's going to do any heroic things that we know aren't going to work. But what do you think? Well, adoption goes right through the roof. You've now just given somebody so much more information in a way that wasn't scary or threatening when you open the dialogue. So I think end-of-life care is going to be a big one, and there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of next-generation end-of-life care providers all over the country. Another big problem that we have is people who are on too many medications because they're seeing a lot of specialists. We think we've got a lot of rules about this drug has a contraindication with this drug. But we don't know when somebody's on 20 meds, this one and this one and this one and this one and this one, if you add this whole cocktail up, is there toxicity in there? But we are now, with artificial intelligence, we can find that there are certain cocktails that are actually very dangerous to people. And you wouldn't have picked it up on a head-to-head contraindication. But the AI is finding it. And what we learn is about 25% of seniors are on a dangerous cocktail that could lead to an admission this year. And if we fix it, we will reduce the total cost of care for that population by 25%. So 25% times 25%, it winds up being about a 5% across the board savings. But that's a very new area. Really looking for ways in which the drugs are not really helping and could actually be hurting people. So those are just a couple, but I think there's a lot of these things that you look at and you say, why are we so different from other countries in certain areas, and they're at half the cost and we're at double the cost? So what can we learn from them? We wind up thinking a lot about things like that.
One question that came in related to that is, if you were to think about deploying capital into senior living, sort of healthcare, real estate, is that an area that you would get into?
We actually do deploy capital there. We have a real estate fund, though. So we do senior living. People think of it as real estate. It's actually pretty operationally intensive as well. And so you got to be prepared for that. It's probably 1/3 hospitality, 1/3 real estate, and 1/3, kind of healthcare. It's an interesting business model. We like it. Everything about the demographic, future. And what's nice is, if you go back 20 years ago, people would think you were being put, quote, in a home, and that was very stigmatizing. What's wrong with you? You don't have any family members or what? Now, these independent living, assisted living, memory care, these facilities are so attractive and have so many services and so much engagement for, let's say, it's starting with independent living. The people are with a whole cohort of new friends, being very active in the arts and different social activities, that there's communities all over the country now where there's waiting lists to get into these things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really turned from a negative to a very positive thing.
Mm-hmm. One question that came up, you talked about over-treatment, sort of a big issue with fee-for-service. Do you feel like under-treatment can be an issue in value-based care?
I feel like you're really incented not to undertreat either, because usually if you're undertreating, it's going to spiral out of control. And the whole big thing you're trying to avoid is hospital admissions. Well, nobody wants to be in the hospital. Think of that as a defect. Okay, something has caused you to get to an acute status. You've got to be in the hospital. And if you're undertreating, you could be causing those acute episodes. So you have to give appropriate treatment. When I talk about overtreatment, I have seen in medical records a 91-year-old with pancreatic cancer, which is a terminal, situation, who is getting a surgery because of a small lump that's been found in the breast, which is going to have nothing to do with this person's eventual outcome. And yet this person is being subjected to that. And it's just not, it's not what, and it's interesting, if you ask doctors, and this is a great question for anyone relative to your own health and your family's health. Every time you're getting a consult from a doctor and you have to make a decision, ask them what they would do if it was them. And most of them will tell you once you put it that way. They don't want to give you advice, but they will tell you what they would do if it was them. And what you would see, for instance, is physicians who have cancer have a very different course of care than Joe Q. Public who has cancer. What's the single biggest difference? Number one, they do make sure that they have rescue meds. A lot of the reasons why cancer patients are in the hospital is because they're having a very bad reaction to the chemotherapy. And so it's really symptom management. And there are ways that you can predict that and have the medications available at home. Number two, they won't go through that last Hail Mary episode of chemotherapy, which has no chance of curing you and maybe could get you another few weeks of poor quality life extension. So yeah, there's a lot of overtreatment, and I think this incentive model really does not incent you to undertreat because it'll boomerang on you.
So you talked about sort of differences in healthcare, treatments across different regions. So we had a question saying, is the biggest issue preventing equitable healthcare across the US the American desire to preserve choice?
It's interesting. I see more variation that has nothing to do with kind of equitable. It's more, you're just not getting to the right doctor. I think that's the other thing I would really share with anyone. If anyone in my family has a health crisis, we do a lot of research on who are the best doctors, and we get them second and third opinions, and it makes a huge difference getting to the best doctor. I'll give you another example. So let's take pancreatic cancer. It is one of the worst cancers you can get. However, if you go to USC, they will find 35% more of the pancreatic tumors to be resectable. Why is that important? It turns out that's the only cure we have today, is if we can remove it. And those surgeons there are doing more of these surgeries, and they have perfected the technique. And so where another doctor would say you're really not, this is not operable situation, you go to them and you're operable. It's the difference between living and dying, right? So it's super important to do your research on that. I would say that's more of what the variation is just the difference between best practices and not, as opposed to, I think where equitable situations come into play is people who don't get in to see a primary care doctor. And yet we know that the Medicaid population, so this would be the disadvantaged population, they have, there's a lot of programs to try to get them to connected to a primary care doctor. We know that if a person shows up at a hospital in the US, they're going to be treated no matter what. And that's because of EMTALA laws. And I think that what we really have to focus on is making sure people know what's available to them and making sure that they get, connected to that. Sometimes it's just a lack of knowledge, actually. I didn't know that I could be treated. And so I just somehow didn't avail myself of the care. It's kind of a not understanding the situation.
And it's one thing many people may not know is a large chunk of healthcare deals come through Chicago-based firms. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that. So what do you think is driving that? And
I have thought a lot about it. Somebody told me, I haven't seen the data directly, but somebody told me that if we have $1, for every dollar invested by a private equity firm in the United States in healthcare, 50 cents was invested out of Chicago. So that's a big deal. We have 50% of the market share of healthcare private equity here. We, at one time, had a lot of big and powerful healthcare companies. With the Baxters, we still have Baxter, and we have its spinoff. We have Abbott Laboratories. We have other, pharma companies. But I do feel like it's kind of the third coast in a way, Chicago. And so it's not the finance hub of New York, and it's not the entertainment hub of LA. And also healthcare is one of those things that happens all over the country. So the middle of the country is as good as any place to be around things. But you do throughout the Midwest. I mean, whether it's Eli Lilly in Indianapolis or Medtronic in Minnesota, you see a lot of the healthcare companies just kind of more evenly distributed, let's say, than the finance sector, entertainment sector.
All right. And there was a question about private equity sort of more broadly, not just healthcare. What are the trends that you're seeing in PE?
In PE, I think one of the most interesting trends is this concept of a continuation vehicle. And so what you have now is people are running, GPs are running funds saying, hey, I've got a winner company. Should I sell it? And great, I got returns from my investors. That's all good. But now that company's in the hands of a larger private equity firm, and they're going to get a sure winner. I'm selling my sure winner. So now with a continuation vehicle, I can have my cake and eat it too. I can say to my LPs, hey, we have a really great company. Maybe we've already gotten a 9x on this company. But we think it's right here in terms of an inflection point, and we think the next 5 years is going to be extraordinary. So we want to do a continuation vehicle. If you want to take all your chips off the table, perfect, no problem. If you want to take a 5x and roll a 4x because you're thrilled with a 5x and you want to play with house money, that's good too. And for all the amount of money that you want in terms of liquidity, we'll bring in new investors. Now, these new investors are also a way for the private equity firm to build their franchise with new types of investors that are not already part of their LP base. It's also that one company could produce almost another fund of economics because it tends to be very large now. So if I got a 9x on one company and now I'm going to do a continuation vehicle, I will raise as much on that one company as I did in the entire fund that company came out of, which are now also paying fees and carry. The other thing is, if you ever do the math on crystallizing your carry and then turning it into an asset, it's explosive in terms of value creation for the GP. So What's the consequence of all this? I think you're going to see a lot of the middle market GPs hanging on to their winners longer, and that's going to starve the bigger firms of those assets. So what's the consequence of that? I think those bigger firms are going to come down into the middle market, would be my prediction, to get more of that and to create their own ability to create that feeder ramp.
Mary, we had a question. I think I'll summarize it by just saying, related to something you said earlier, how do you use like behavioral insights into the way you operate as a company, right? I mean, a lot of what you're trying to do is to change people's, you want to get people to do the right care early on. What are sort of behavioral insights and how do you use them?
It's a great point. I think, thinking about what is kind of the human dynamic that is getting in the way of the right thing happening. Okay. Sometimes it's just people are so time sliced and rushed and feel overwhelmed that they're not getting to it. Their heart's in the right space. They'd like to do it, but they're overwhelmed. And so you look for ways to declutter and de-emphasize things that really are not value add, and get them off the plates of people. Then you might still get into, now the clinical team is all ready to do something very good, but there might be a problem with adoption. And a lot of times this can be in the behavioral health area. How do we help people stay on their medications? And things like that. And there you do look for feedback loops and ways of monitoring. But we now have the ability, let's say, for somebody who's had repeated episodes of substance abuse addiction, to know from how they're interacting with their phone, if they allow us to give them this aftercare product, to predict when they're getting close to or in danger of a relapse, just by how they're using their phone. And then we can reach out to them and have hopefully a very timely intervention to try to help get them stabilized. So we look for, different things that can help us monitor, this whole thing about remote patient monitoring. There's a lot of people who are supposed to be doing dietary things to manage their congestive heart failure. They're supposed to be on low sodium. If we're doing this remote patient monitoring, we can really kind of catch that uptick in their weight, and get to them more frequently. And then I think eventually, as people know that they're being monitored and helped, they start to come around on compliance a little bit better with their care model as well. Not everybody, but a number of people do.
Mary, there's been some press about PE in healthcare. What do you think of the press generally? What would you say to that?
I think that there's certainly, I have seen situations that I think are disheartening in terms of things that people have done. And the big one that people are talking about is Steward Health. And I think it was for quite some time really run in a poor way. But I also think that it's usually, you'll find it's more of a generalist who is a little bit more of a healthcare tourist, who's making those kind of moves. People who are in the industry for the long haul, it's a very parochial industry, and your reputation is everything. And if people don't see you as a good actor driving towards better health outcomes, better patient experience, and so forth, you can become a pariah pretty quickly. And so I would say I have not seen in general the healthcare specialist firms doing anything but what I would view as very beneficial innovation in the industry.
We have a question. I think what they're asking is sort of what are sort of multiples in the industry, like EBITDA multiples? What is for healthcare companies?
It really depends based on the growth and how big it is. You could buy a very small dental operation that's not growing, but you're doing a roll up 4, 5, 6 times. Ultimately, after you grow that company up and have a good repeatable process and you have some organic growth levers, you can sell it for 14 times. If you have a really, really good dermatology business, we sold one for 20 times, but it had best in class organic growth, best-in-class ways of unlocking value on acquisitions, best-in-class bottom line margins. It kind of hit everything. And I think it's the only time a dermatology business has been sold for 20 times. You could sell a veterinary practice for 24 times. People love the vet space. It has no government payers. There's no regulation. The share of wallet of a U.S. consumer that they're willing to spend on pets keeps going up. And so in a way, it's all, I could boil it all down to, I'll tell you the multiple after you tell me what your growth rate is, your margins, and how predictable your growth model is. And then you could start getting premiums. But in general, I think kind of mid-teens and up for good quality companies.
Sounds great. Question about longevity research. And I mean, obviously with the new drugs coming on, the weight loss drugs, the notion is this is going to fundamentally change how long people can live. What does that do to healthcare as people start living longer?
Well, first the question is it's more going to do something to our kind of like affordability in general, because if that changes and we also don't change how long people are working, that's where the conundrum comes in. So if we're going to see a big life extension, I think we all have to change our minds on when's a good time to retire. You know, my mentor, Geor Schulz, never really retired. He was always fully engaged and lived to be 100. I think that, you know, kind of continuing to be engaged throughout your productive life is a great opportunity. But I think that's one of the things that could happen is everybody's living a lot longer, and there was nothing about the way they lived their life or prepared their retirement that was going to finance 30 to 40 years. So that's the first thing. And then I think that in general, with longer longevity, there's a lot of other things that are very good. You don't get to be a very advanced age unless you have made good kind of lifestyle decisions. And so some of the very expensive conditions that are baked into our total current costs, like high rates of diabetes and so forth, begin to fall out. And that's a really good thing. And by the way, if we then fix end of life care and people are getting their wishes, we could change the cost a lot as a positive outcome too.
Mary, I'm going to ask you some questions that came in sort of more about your career and sort of personal questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
What are some of the biggest like challenges you faced or sort of things you've done that were, looking back, mistakes, if you will, that you had to learn from?
Sure. I would say in healthcare, one of the biggest mistakes that we made was investing in a company that looked like it was very profitable, and it was out of network, meaning it did not have negotiated rates with payers. And I would say we've learned we would never do another deal without the vast majority of the revenue coming from negotiated payer rates. We knew it was going to be a problem. We thought we would have more time to fix it. And the payers just kind of snapped into, you know, we're gonna put you out of network, and nobody's going to come until you get a contract with us. That was a huge learning. I think another thing that we've learned is to really understand how to avoid attrition in your clinical producers. And so there's certain specialties that have basically taught, let's take dental, you're not a real dentist unless you're going to own your own practice. So that means you hire them, you teach them, you train them, they're good at presenting cases to patients, their hand speed's gotten real good, and boom, they're leaving to go start their own, hang up their own shingle. So what we've learned to counteract that kind of undesirable attrition is how to build partnership models so that, hey, you could own a piece of this business. You don't have to go start your own shingle. It's going to be hard work. Be part of a success story. And so we create these models where as physicians grow in their contribution, they actually can earn their way into a partnership model. So then you might say about 25% of your docs in a given business are partners, but they're actually producing about 60 or 70% of the profits of the business, the partners. They're really high performing. That makes your business very stable. So I think coming up with the ideas to counteract attrition on your producers is a really important thing too. There's plenty of examples of things to be learned.
So one was more just that, obviously as a woman in a highly competitive field, what advice would you give to yourself if you were sort of mid-career?
I would say the biggest bias I found in private equity is, and it's a big one, they're looking for people who have this one kind of pedigree. They came out of, these undergraduate programs. They went to these investment banks for 2 years and went through the hazing process. And then they came out and did an associate program. And then they went to these MBAs, and then now they're a VP. And that actually leads to, I think, a certain amount of myopia in the industry. So I would say I would look for being part of a team that has already shown that they're more innovative and more creative in where they're sourcing their investment team. They're looking for people with operating experiences and backgrounds, and they're looking for all those different ingredients that can come together as a team and make a big difference. I would actually say I never regretted the time I spent learning fundamentally how to create value in a company, how to diagnose the value levers, and then how to move into action those ideas and really handicap how achievable it was to implement with a normal team. In other words, I'm not going to get Nobel laureates to perform all these jobs. I have to make sure normal teams in the company can be successful. So you have to handicap not just great ideas, but implementation success and risks. And those skills, I think, can make you either a great founder of an operating business, but also ultimately can make you a great investor, really learning those things.
It's also kind of a related question about how do you prioritize sort of work-life balance? How do you think about that over the years?
Well, when I was raising my kids, that would be the time that everyone would think that's your hardest part. You've got little ones, you've got a really demanding career. Now, the good news is I had the experience of a father who had a very demanding and exciting career and building businesses. And he was the father of 7 children. And he had a great relationship with all of us. So I knew it was possible to do both. I started with that, it's possible. And I remember what I would do is just kind of say, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? Okay, I've got a child who gets really sick or just absolutely needs my time. So instead of fretting about it all the time, I knew what I would do. I would quit at that moment and focus on that child. So once I knew what I would do. It wasn't an impossible problem to solve. That's what I would do. I didn't have to worry about it all the time. And I was fortunate. I was able to arrange to have support to help me while I was at work with the kids. And my husband had his business as well. But we also have a very close family, and we're all living close by. So I feel like our kids were very close to their aunts, their uncles, their cousins, mom and dad. It was a very close family wrapper. And we were able to balance things. And I know it's hard. And there certainly are people that deal with more challenges because there are, kids that need more help and more time. And they just have to know that they're going to make the choice when they need to.
Maybe one more sort of future investment question. Your thoughts on the growth of the aesthetic space, med spas, things like that?
I think it's a big opportunity for sure. Again, it's people are willing to spend a lot of money. I should have said that. As people get older, they still want to look younger. So they're going to be spending more money on that. And so everything about how to keep your skin. And by the way, it's really interesting. The vast majority of aging signals are really coming from sun exposure. I think all of us are have done a great job with our kids of making sure they're SPF protected all the time. I think they're going to be looking a lot better than any of us did at similar ages. But I think the med spa thing is something that is a huge opportunity, and consumers want it. They want it done well. They want it done safely, and I see that demand trend growing.
So Mary, you mentioned Geor Schulz a couple of times. Maybe you could just speak about your connection to him and how that started and it sort of kept going.
Sure. So I at the time I was running the energy business for Accenture, and we were very interested in alternative energy sources. We're very interested in hydrogen and some of the things that are fueling the whole electronic vehicle era. And partly because it was also almost a patriotic thing, because we could see that it would change geopolitical threats for the United States. That if we took our transportation fleet off of petroleum, all the things that we worry about in the Middle East would have kind of a different complexion to them, and so on and so forth. And so we said, how many things could you be thinking about that could really revolutionize both transportation and national security, and the energy sector? So that was pretty exciting. So we wanted to get the best people in the world kind of around a table with us. And we said, who could convene? And so my colleague Etienne Defire said, well, I was over at Booz Allen, and we had Geor Schulz. And the minute George picked up the phone, asked anyone to participate, it was 100% yeses. And so we asked, I went and visited with George, told him what we were interested in. And he was quite interested right off the bat in the topic. And I think if it was just some sort of a schmooze fest or something, he wouldn't have been. But the content was very intriguing to him, and he immediately got kind of the consequential possibilities. And so so he joined and chaired the advisory board, and we were able to get all those people to join and really fuel our business. Then when I was starting R1, I asked him to be on the board of R1, and he was very influential again in many ways, helping us grow that company. And then when we started Chicago Pacific, I asked him to chair our advisory board, and that was amazing. I can't tell you how many times we were courting founders, and we said, "Oh, listen, an advisory board meeting's coming up in San Francisco. And George is going to host it at his home. It's the most beautiful penthouse in San Francisco. Maybe you'd like to come and see what the culture is like." Oh boy, would we like to. And like 100% of the founders who ever came to those basically shut down talking to any other firm and said, yeah, we want to join with you guys.
And so for the audience who don't know, we have a Geor Schulz Innovation Fund at Chicago Booth that funds startups. And I was actually funded by Mary in George's name. And Mary's been an amazing supporter of the school. Our healthcare initiative is being funded by Mary as well. So Mary, maybe just speak a little bit about your philanthropy. I know you've done also a lot for like Catholic charities and education. What motivates you to give back, and how do you decide where you want your efforts to go?
Sure. Well, I think it's super fun. I think maybe what drives me to become successful is to have resources that you can then use to fuel, good outcomes in the world. And it kind of helps you amplify your impact. It kind of, in a way, it gives you leverage to have more impact. So, and I always like to think about things that really helped me. So very much at the top of the list is giving back to the University of Chicago and looking for ways to amplify impact there. I think the Innovation Fund is really cool because it's one of the things that George really believed in, which is cross-disciplinary interaction that could really lead to more innovation, but really turn it into a real-world productive product or service and commercialize it, and not kind of keep all the good ideas internally, actually get them out into the world. And so the Innovation Fund is all about that. I also love in healthcare to find things that are on the cusp of a breakthrough. I mentioned pancreatic cancer. My dad died of pancreatic cancer. It will probably become the second biggest area of cancer fatality in the United States very soon, just because we haven't made any progress on it. And so I love to invest in possible breakthroughs. And so there's one that's being worked on at Beth Israel Deaconess, which is part of the Harvard system. They're using light scattering spectroscopy to identify. People oftentimes will have these cysts on their pancreas, and we don't know which ones will become cancerous. But if we could predict which ones, it's a little bit like, taking a polyp out after a colonoscopy. That's how one of the big contributors to longevity. If we could do this, this could really be the breakthrough for pancreatic. But Mayo Clinic is also doing some really cool artificial intelligence things. What they're looking at is all of these images that they have of people even before they got cancer, to say, okay, there was not a lump there earlier, but was there some other tissue change that was a precursor to the formation of a hard tumor, which could have been predictive? I think that's a really exciting breakthrough. I do love Catholic Charities, and especially in education. And so I have, actually what's kind of fun is we have the top 10% of St. Lawrence High School, which is actually in a Hispanic neighborhood. It's about 52% of the kids are Black or Hispanic. And they are often going to be the first generation that will go to college from their families. And we take the top 10% of the class and we give them a scholarship that would be the kind of help that wealthy families can get for their kids, to get a very good ACT score, to be getting an internship, to be able to write a really good essay, and to aspire to the right universities, and to know how to get into those stretch schools. And so I love that, because you can really change the arc of a young person's whole trajectory. So anyway, we look for all these different things that could really have an impact in different ways.
Mary, thank you so much. We're out of time. We're actually way over, but I mean, this was incredible. It was so, I really appreciated just the broad-ranging nature and your openness, and just the incredible knowledge that you bring to bear on this sector. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you for being such a great alum of the school.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun, Madhav, as always.
All right. Thanks so much, Mary. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.